friends. Hello, hi, how are you? It's me editing me because filming me didn't film an intro because who knows what she was doing. But we're here with me now, the logical Hannah. So hi, welcome to my video. Today we're going to be ranking my eyeshadow palettes. Instead of doing it by color this year, I decided I would do it by brand and then pick my favorite ones, like my top from each brand, and then rank those. That's how we did it this year. I'm doing this in two parts because doing it all in one is honestly just aggressive. So this is my more mainstream brands, and then I will also have my more indie brands in the next video. So yeah, I hope you guys like it. And yeah. Okay, bye! Let's start with Natasha Denona palettes. So these are all the Natasha Denona palettes I own. I have the Sunrise palette, which looks like this. I have the Natasha Denona Love palette. I have the Glam palette, and I also have the Gold palette. The Gold palette was actually gifted to me by a subscriber a while ago, and I have to say, this palette, first of all, some of the shades did break. This one fell out completely one day, and this one has been on the brink for a while. This palette in particular is one of the reasons that I actually want the Natasha Denona Biba palette, because I actually love the formula on this palette. If it wasn't so fragile, I would absolutely travel with it more. The golds are beautiful. The mattes are actually stunning and amazing. This is kind of what I had hoped that the Sunset palette would be from Natasha Denona. I decluttered that earlier this year. And kind of what I'd hoped would be the formula that was so good was this one, and this one actually ended up being really fantastic. So far, out of the Natasha Denona palettes that are the $129 ones that I've tried, this is absolutely the one I would continuously recommend. I'm a big fan of like mustard brown shades. I think that this palette provides a really nice set of neutrals along with having like really beautiful shimmers. The only thing I don't like about this palette is the blues, and that's just because I personally am not a fan of the pop of blue thing. So while I'm sure other people might utilize those shades don't really get worn by me. However, like this whole section is my jam, and this is like a inner corner. This is everything. I don't really use this too much, but this whole part, in love. So I absolutely, and the packaging on this is really cool. The Glam palette, this is newer to me. I think the shimmers performed okay, and I think that the mattes performed okay. This is absolutely not my favorite $65 palette that she's come out with. I will say what I didn't know when I bought it, and what I wish I had known, was a lot of people are taking issue with these shade names, which I totally agree with. They are named things like inner corner, crease, lash line. First and foremost is just dumb. Like, not dumb, but I just feel like that's so, like, that's like, well, it reminded me of those Wet n Wild palettes that are like $6. Like, why don't you give them actual names like you literally always do? And a lot of people pointed out that naming a shade that's really for white people crease is problematic, which I do agree with. It's not inclusive. Natasha's response was that there's holes in the back so you can poke out the shades and just remove them and switch them around, which, like, okay, but maybe just pick more inclusive names next time. I will say the shimmers on this are really nice, but as much as I'm not an ABH fan, I much prefer something like the Anastasia Beverly Hills Sultry palette to something like this, because while the shimmers were okay, I didn't find them to be particularly wowing, you know? This definitely lacked the glam that I was hoping for with this palette. The Love palette. I actually love this palette. Unsurprisingly, I really enjoy this. This is absolutely a color story that I love. I will say I think the formula on this one is really nice. I like the shimmer shades. I like the matte shades. This shimmer shade right here, Passion and Giving, are two of my all-time favorites because they just are such a Barbie pink color. It's really nice. I think honestly, if we're talking between like what I think other people might want, this is a great option if you love pinks and purples and warm tones and Valentine's Day looks. Like, this is your baby if you want something in the Natasha Denona formula. However, the Sunrise palette is also amazing. If you like the warm tones in the sense that you like yellows and oranges and reds, like, this is your baby. I would say out of these two, I actually use this one a lot more. And I think that's just because something about being able to create like the perfect sunset eye with this palette is so nice. I just love it. So this one is definitely my favorite, with this being a close second simply because you guys know I love pinks and purples. And a lot of people, when my palette, my Smoky Glow palette came out, compared it to this palette. I don't think they're necessarily super similar, but I definitely see why people are making the comparison because color story wise, they are a little bit similar. So obviously that means this is something I'd be interested in because I made a similar color story to this. So if I were ranking these, I would have to say that the Sunrise palette would go first, and then we would have the Love palette, and then we would have the Glam palette in last, and then the Gold palette. Yes, that seems right. So that is how I would rank my Natasha Denona palettes. This is where it gets a little dicey because I don't feature some of these brands anymore on my channel. We're gonna put that aside for today, I guess, because I do want to be honest about the things that I have. So these are my Anastasia palette. So I have the Soft Glam palette, the Soft Clam, which is very well loved. I also have the Jackie Aina palette. Again, very well loved. And I also have my probably most well loved, the Anastasia Sultry palette, which looks like this. Oh, I love it. Okay, and then I also have, I'm gonna count the Norvina palettes in with this. I have the Anastasia Norvina Pro. I believe this is the volume 3. This is volume 3, the big bad boy. And then I also have volume 1, which looks like this. So just right off the bat, the volumes are absolutely at the bottom. And it's not because I think they're bad necessarily. I just bought them with the intention of buying the Anastasia formula in these really bright, vibrant colors, and I didn't get that. So I think that for that reason alone, like I don't really use them too much because I was so disappointed by the formula. And I also think after buying these palettes was when I kind of realized that I just don't like big palettes anymore. Like I just don't like massive chungus palettes. I prefer something with like 18 pans or less because realistically these absolutely mammoth palettes just don't get super used by me. It's too many colors, it's too overwhelming. I am way too basic of a person to use something like this. So because of that, I don't really use these too much. However, I will say, I thought I would rate volume 1 a little bit higher, but I actually think this would go lower. I just think these colors are a little bit more muted and not necessarily as exciting. While I don't think we see this color story together a lot, I have a ton of purples and like all of these colors. Really the only unique colors to my collection are this one, and maybe something like this, but that's honestly in this palette, the one over here. So I would say that this is actually much lower, and I would say this one actually scores much higher because while it's not the Anastasia formula that I love, I will say that they perform super well. They're very pigmented, they're very bright, and while I don't do a ton of bright looks, again, to warrant having a palette this big full of bright eyeshadows, I will say this palette makes me inspired. It definitely makes me want to create really fun, exciting looks. I've used this in trying to look like an Instagram model videos. I think it's a really fun palette in general. So while this is definitely still lower as far as my ABH palettes go, I don't think this is a bad palette. And this is actually the one I would recommend because I think it's if you like these colors, because it's the most fun. Okay, as far as these go, if you've been watching for a while, I think you'll probably know how this is gonna go. Sultry is obviously gonna be my number 1. This has always been one of my favorite palettes, not only just from Anastasia, but of all time. The way that these shimmers perform is just so unreal. I'm not even that crazy about the mattes. Like I don't mind them, but I'm absolutely not like going gaga over the mattes. But the shimmers in this palette, Pearl, Cinder, Rose Quartz, especially Cyborg over here, they're just so unreal and beautiful. And because of that, this has always been one of my favorite Anastasia palettes, and the packaging. I love the glitter. I actually think something interesting has happened though. I think the Jackie Aina palette has somewhat dethroned the Soft Glam palette. And the reason for that is because, first of all, look at this color story. It's beautiful. This shade Zam I use all of the time. I love mix. I know this is a little bit more basic, but I love doing the pinks and then Zam, or I'll do kind of like an orangey brown and I'll do this shade and this shade on my lid, and that always looks stunning as well. Weirdly, these two shades down here don't get used too often, which I thought they would, but these shades I use a ton, these shades I use a ton. I really use this all the time. I like it because I feel like the colors are so distinct. Whenever I see people wearing the Jackie Aina Aina palette, I know that it's the Jackie Aina palette because the mattes and the shimmers are just super unique. I grabbed for this quite a bit actually. And I've been grabbing for this less lately. I don't know why. I don't know if I'm kind of getting like Anastasia Modern Renaissance vibes from it maybe, where I've just had it a really long time and I'm kind of have moved on to other warm tone neutral palettes. But this will always be somewhat of a staple for me. I remember kind of roasting it when it first came out. And I still stand by that this is definitely more of a basic palette. But one of the biggest questions I get asked on my channel is if you could recommend a basic palette, what would you recommend? And I will say, I think that this is a fantastic one. I mean, it's truly so good, especially for the time when it was created. It's truly so good. But I think since this coming out, other things have come out that have kind of beat it out. So I don't know how much longer I'll have this one, but for now it's here. So I would do Soft Glam third, Jackie Aina palette second, and then obviously Sultry coming in first. Volume 3 and Volume 1 in 5th place. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's how I would rate my Anastasia palettes. Won't be talking about them for a while. Let's do Too Faced. I actually had way less than I thought, and I guess that's just because I don't buy from Too Faced. The more I do these videos, the more I'm like, yeah, I really don't buy from anyone anymore. I can't wait to do the indie brand one, because the indie brand ones are always so much more exciting because I actually like love the owners and it's just different. It's a different vibe. Okay, so first and foremost, I would have to say that of these palettes, my favorite still is probably the Just Peachy Mattes palette. Honestly, from Too Faced, this was just a really, oh, there you guys are. Hi. This was just a really solid palette from Too Faced. Like, Too Faced quality is known to be a little bit more hit or miss, which can sometimes be very annoying with their palettes. But this one truly was such a hit. Every shade is so beautiful. Even now, I still will bring this well, when I traveled, I would still bring this traveling with me because it just has a really nice mix of neutral tones while still having those little pops of pink. Something about bringing an all matte palette traveling and then just a couple like shimmer toppers like my Kaja bento boxes is really nice and carefree. And this is honestly something that I still love and still use to this day. And probably my favorite formula from Too Faced. They just normally, their matte don't really impress me, but they absolutely crushed it with this matte formula, which is so weird because then they did the white peach and I bought that because I loved this one and that one sucked like so bad. Why they couldn't just do the same thing that they did with this, I will never know, but this is probably my favorite. I don't even know why I still have this. I know I've decluttered this. I don't know what it's still doing in there. This has got to be a one I put back. I don't use this hardly ever because it's really just a shimmer topper palette, and frankly the shimmers are not impressive enough to pull this out purely for shimmer use. I've got to see if one of my friends wants this because it should go to a better home. The only shades I really love using in here are Rich Girl, Classy, and Sassy, and then I also don't mind Gold Dipped, but all of the other ones I don't reach for. They're just not that good. So this is probably be a last place contender, honestly. And then, ooh, this is a little bit tough. I love the gingerbread palette, despite the fact that I thought I would hate it because it's kind of boring. I actually love this. The shade Hot Toddy, where is it? Right there. Such a good shade. I create some really, really fun looks with this, especially, I know it's obvious because it's like, oh, it's a gingerbread palette, but I obviously have more of a want to use this during Christmas time. I just feel like it gets me in the holiday spirit, the experience of it. Hot Toddy and Spiked Eggnog are my two favorite shades. Love these. I think the reason that the peach palette would still reign supreme is simply because there's more shades in here that I love than in this palette. Like, I love Luscious, I love Bellini, I love Peaches and Cream, I love Georgia, I love Just Peachy, I love Charmed, I'm sure, Super Yum, and Puree were amazing. There's just more shades in here that I love and still reach for and use, despite the fact that this palette is like 3 years old. This is actually, I would say, probably the oldest palette in my collection at this point, and I don't want to get rid of it because I don't want to rebuy it from Too Faced because I just don't want to support them. But at the same time, it's such a good palette. I just love it. It's such a good neutral palette. To Too Faced credit, like, this is probably one of the best palettes they've created along with the Peachy Mattes. For whatever reason, they just really got the peach line correct for me. I know some people hate the smell, so if you don't like the smells of Too Faced products, maybe steer clear, but this one is still like a favorite. There's a reason this has lasted so long for me and why I still actually use it to this day. So I think I'm gonna actually switch things up, put the Sweet Peach first, because truly this has been a fave for so long. And then put the Just Peachy mattes, and then put the gingerbread, and then just get rid of the gold. I don't know why I still have it, but have the gold there. So this would be my Too Faced ranking. All right, let's do Pat McGrath. So here they all are, my weapons, as I like to call them. Truly, you could use this as a weapon. This is the Divine Rose palette in the little limited edition pink packaging, which is very cute. I love this palette, I do, and especially this. There's certain shades and palettes that I really gravitate towards. This is one of them. It is probably the most beautiful pixie dusk-like shade ever. It literally looks like Cinderella in a pan. It's beautiful, and I will probably wear this on my wedding day because I am in love with this shade so much. So that should tell you right off the bat that I like this palette, but this shade in particular, absolutely stunning. I will say, I have to kind of look at all of these because they all are a bit similar. This is the 5. Ugh, I love this one. This might be my favorite Pat McGrath palette I own. Charles actually bought me this when I hit 10,000 subscribers, which was super, super sweet. And I just love, I still pull this out all the time and like love to use it. And then we have the other rose, the Rose 2, which is just like this one's fun sister. You can kind of see. Similar, but different. And again, this one has a shade that I absolutely love, this pink shade. I don't love it as much as I love that white shade, the like Cinderella shade, but this shade also is amazing, as is this one. Okay. Also, I have, just so you guys can see the quads, these are from Christmas time last year. This is the pink and like yellow one, which I don't use that one that much, if I'm being honest with myself. This one I use a lot more because it has, again, one of my favorite shades, which is, I love this red and this sort of copper color, and also this super, super sparkly shade. I love, 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 love this shade as well. Okay, I think I'm gonna have to put the Mothership 5 first, simply because I love the most shades out of this one, and this was my first Pat palette. Only reason I wanted it so bad was because I knew I would love every single shade, and I do in fact love and worship every single shade. So the 5 would definitely go here. And then I low-key, I know when I reviewed these, I kind of gave an opposite opinion, I feel. I low-key, after owning these for a while, really love this one. Just a super nice everyday palette, which I love. You can see I've used especially these mattes quite a bit more. So I think I'm gonna put the Rose 1 second. And then I actually think I'm gonna do something controversial and put one of the quads for third. This one. Sadly, you can't buy these quads anymore, but also won't harp on this too much, but this quad I love. Third, the second Rose palette, which is still stunning. I mean, beautiful, but fourth. And then this one, which I definitely use the least, 5th. I was a little disappointed by this one. This shade is obviously beautiful, but the yellow packs kind of a weird punch on the eye that I don't necessarily love. So would in fact be my ranking. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. I only have 2 Nars palettes and then 1 Tarte palette, so I figured I'd just throw them all in together. Obviously my Tartelette in Bloom is gonna rank first out of all of these. I actually rebought this. This is the second time that I've bought the Tartelette in Bloom. I adore this palette. I don't know what else to say. This shade Funny Girl has and always will be my favorite go-to like everyday shimmer on the eye, and just mixing this whole side together for like a work day is perfect. I stand by that this is probably one of my all-time favorite everyday neutral palettes. There's one other one that I'm going to talk about in the next category that I also use a lot for everyday, but this one is still one of my favorite everyday palettes. And then as far as Nars goes, I have this more pink toned palette from them, and then I also have this more like kind of warm toned with a pop of pink. I definitely use this one quite a bit more just because the neutrals are a lot better. So I do prefer this one. And I also think these glitters are a lot better. I'm not gonna lie, when I got this one, I was kind of disappointed because the glitters are just so lackluster. I feel like they look so pretty in the pan, but they honestly are very dry. And the payoff kind of reminds me of a baked shadow, but like a poorly baked shadow. Like a shadow that's just flat out dry and doesn't get the most pigment. So as far as ranking goes, I'd have to do this, the Tartelette one, and then the Nars Afterglow second, and then the Ignited in third place. That makes sense, yeah. I'm not crazy about the Nars formula. I don't mind these palettes, and I think they're really nice for travel purposes or just like on the go. I think these are great, but I'm not like the biggest fan of their formula, whereas like this formula I really, really like. So for this category, I have like YouTuber palettes, just because I feel like most of these would be considered like mainstream now, especially since Dominique Cosmetics and Lunar Beauty were / are sold at Sephora. I know Lunar Beauty isn't anymore, but first we have the Lunar Beauty Moonspell palette. I actually adore this palette like a lot. I love this one. Probably my favorite product that Manny has actually put out. I love the mix of the purples and blues, and I also love the shimmer shades in this one. It's a fantastic palette. But along with that, we have the Dominique Cosmetics palettes. This is so funny. So I actually talked about in a video where if I had $1,000 to spend at Sephora, this is a palette I would buy. And then one of you guys sent it to me, which was like so unnecessarily sweet. This is the Latte palette from Dominique Cosmetics. Literally so nice. Just sent to my P.O. box. The nicest thing ever. And I actually freaking love this palette. My suspicions about this palette were correct, and that I thought I would enjoy a very neutral, nice palette. And I do love this, especially the shade right here, Macchiato, I adore, and Caramel and Hazelnut on the crease. This is such a nice neutral palette, which was exactly the reason I wanted it. So I've actually been loving this since getting it a couple weeks ago. And then I of course have the Berries and Cream palette from Dominique Cosmetics. I just can't get rid of this guy. If I'm remembering correctly, I think I might have decluttered this, but then I think it was one of those ones I thought about and put back, simply because the shade Sugar Cookie is so good. And also I don't have a ton of more cool toned purple palettes. So for that reason, this one has always really stuck out to me. This is actually hard because I genuinely enjoy and love like all three of these palettes. They all knocked it out of the park. I think Berries and Cream would have to be last, just because color story wise, there's a reason I don't have a lot of cool tone purples, and it's because I use it less. So that's probably here, but it really is a toss up between Moonspell and Latte. I think Latte has to go first, really only because of the color story. I use this color story so much more, whereas this one is a little bit more fun and like different, so I don't use it as much, but it is super fun. And the packaging on this wins, I mean, every time. So pretty. So I would have to say this would be first, the Latte palette, then Moonspell, then Berries and Cream. 1, 2, 3. Boom. I do consider ColourPop not an indie brand anymore, just because they are sold at Ulta, and also I think they're a very poppin' brand. I wouldn't consider them like a small, independently owned brand anymore. Hi, it's editing me. I understand, before I get a million comments, understand the literal meaning of the term indie brand. However, I do think that indie brand have changed and evolved their meaning a little bit in the makeup industry, and now it is kind of the catch-all term applied to smaller brands or brands that maybe only have 1 or 2 people working for them or something like that. So while I'm aware that technically some of these brands might actually be independently owned brands and like by definition are indie brands, I'm using more of the makeup world terminology and not necessarily the literal terminology. So I want to make that clear because I got a couple comments last time, and I just want to let you guys know and I agree with you. I'm just using it in a different way. Thank you. Have a great day. I actually thought I had way more ColourPop palettes, but it kind of makes sense that I don't, because I think I declutter them. I had a lot more of these ones, these like 9 pans, but I know I decluttered them. Some of this I do get in PR. I would actually say half of these I got in PR, being on the ColourPop PR list. You get a lot of PR when you're on ColourPop's PR list because they have launches so frequently. So I would have to say right off the bat that Going Coconuts is my favorite ColourPop palette, bar none. Like, this palette I use so much. The shade right here, Cocoa Crush, is probably one of my most used shades in my collection. I use this palette so much, kind of what I was talking about with the Tartelette and Bloom palette, how that was like my favorite everyday palette. That's what this has turned into for me, is an everyday. I reach for this so often. I think the only comparison between this, the Tartelette and Bloom, and then the Raw Beauty Kristi palette are kind of my go-to everyday neutral palettes right now. So I use this a ton, and this shade, like I said, Cocoa Crush, so good. Palm Reader is also a nice shade, but it is a little bit light, whereas Cocoa Crush is just that perfect pink for me. And all of these neutral shades perform super well. This is like kind of my all-in-one. The only thing that sucks is that the packaging broke, so I can't close it. So I am worried about it going bad quicker. Oh, there we go. Never mind. I'm just dumb. So this is probably going to be up there in first, but it does have some competition because the Sweet Talk palette is also one of my favorite palettes from ColourPop. First of all, I've almost hit pan on side to side because I've used that shade in particular so much. I love the shades in here. Again, it's a really good sort of everyday palette. I would say because I've been leaning more towards like brown neutrals, the Going Coconuts has been great, but I used to lean much more towards pink neutrals every day. Like I was always wearing pink somehow. And when I was in that sort of phase, this was my girl. But now that I've switched to more brown neutrals, I think I use this less. I think probably because like winter and fall are coming, so I'm leaning more towards browns. Whereas in the summertime, I'm definitely going to pick up those pinks again. The packaging on this is also just so pretty. I love it. Those are probably my all-time 2 favorite ColourPop palettes. Then let's see. I really do enjoy Smoke Show. It's really my only smoky palette that is this dark and deep. It's kind of my only cool tone palette. The silver in the middle here, Starstruck, is like unreal. I did a video reviewing this one and you can see my amazement at this shimmer shade. The ColourPop shimmer shades really, really blow me away, and I think the reason I like them as a brand so much is because their mattes are consistently good, and the shimmer shades are like amazing. So it's a good brand in general, especially for the price. This one is probably up there as well. I can tell you which one is gonna be last, and that's the Candy Castle palette. This palette sucks. I'm probably gonna declutter this soon. I hated this palette so much. They sent it to me in their little, you know, ColourPop Land PR, and while I liked a couple of other things from that collection, this palette in particular was just such a miss. The shades like blended into nothing. All of the mattes low-key have glitter in them for some reason, which makes no sense to me. And while I think the concept is cute, I think they really could have done so much more with this. This is just lazy color choices for the actual concept of the palette. You know, like this is so much more interesting than what's on the inside. I actually did enjoy the Wild Nothing palette. Not one that I reach for a ton because it is so much. It's kind of like a more muted version of the Sweet Nothing, honestly, with like some greens and oranges. I don't hate this palette though. I much prefer it to the Candyland collection, and I think they have a similar color story. So this one I don't hate, but it's not like my favorite palette of all time. Probably goes more in the middle. Same thing with the Mulan palette. I actually really liked this, especially for some of these shimmer shades. Some of these are just absolutely unreal. Loyal, Warrior, Like a Girl, all amazing, and the mattes are pretty good. Also, you can see I love this shade right here. I love a cream shade that I can pack all over my lid. I love that. So this will probably go in the middle too. This wasn't a bad palette, but this definitely isn't like my favorite palette of all time. And then we have Aura and Out. This probably does fall more towards the end, but not because it was bad. I would actually argue that this is a more pastel-y collection that they did really, really well, especially this palette in particular. I think they put in nice pastel colors that actually were super pigmented and showed up. I don't know what happened with the Candy Castle that they couldn't do that, but these ones all showed up beautifully. I created some really, really fun looks with this, and I do like this one. I think the thing that keeps me from using it is just it's not a color story that I gravitate towards every day. I gravitate more towards like neutrals and pinks. So while I actually like the formula on this one a lot, probably would be lower just because of the color story. I haven't used this one too much. I think this is just kind of one that gets lost in my drawers a little bit because it is so small and so basic. I do like this. There's nothing wrong with it. It's kind of a mix, honestly, of Sweet Nothing and coconuts. So in theory, this would be a great palette for me, but I just haven't used it too much. So I think this is probably going to go in the middle. So as far as ranking goes, I think just because right now I'm going to say Going Coconuts is my #1, but I really do like the Sweet Talk palette. So that would be #2, and these probably interchange depending on the season. Then I would say Smoke Show. Then I would say Mulan. Then I would say I like the Theory of Nude Mood much more than Wild Nothing. And then I would say Aura and Out. And then I would say Candyland. Moving on. Man, I feel bad about this one because really Sweet Talk is such a favorite, but Going Coconuts really stole the show for me this year. So now let's rank all my faves. We'll do like a final little ranking. I'm actually not really surprised at all at these palettes being my faves, because if I think about what I grab for every day, it's these palettes. So this kind of makes sense. Okay, I know right off the bat that Tartelette and Bloom is probably going to be on the lower end, despite this being an everydayer. And looking at this now, I definitely reach for Latte or Going Coconuts more than I reach for the Tartelette and Bloom as far as everyday. So this is probably more towards the end, whereas these two, Going Coconuts and Dominique Cosmetics, are towards the front. I will say this Pat McGrath palette, as far as being super different. This wins like unique palette of the year in my collection, but I don't reach for it so often only because these shimmers are so different. It's really for like a night out or something special. I don't necessarily reach for this like every single day unless I want like a pow, but this would probably go in the middle. The Sweet Peach palette, while I do love it, I still think it would probably go towards the bottom just because looking at all of these other palettes, the quality does not compare to my other palettes. Even at Too Faced's best, they don't really beat the likes of like, you know, Anastasia or ColourPop. I would say my Natasha Denona palette would probably fall more in the middle as well. Again, just because of the color story. I can't really rank something number one that I wouldn't use every single day. And while I use this quite a lot, definitely not like an everyday palette, more of a special occasion. And obviously, you know, Sultry is going towards the top for sure, but something might have beat it out this year. I think that the Going Coconuts palette from ColourPop is actually going to be beating out my Sultry palette. I stand by that. I use this so often. I pull that out like all the time. I don't really know how else to rank the Going Coconuts palette. While I still love my Sultry and it's still gorgeous, I do not use it nearly as much as I use the Going Coconuts. So I'm gonna put that here. I also think if I'd had this for a longer time, this would probably be beating out the Sultry palette. However, because I haven't had it as long, I haven't had a full time to really use it and love it yet, but this still is number 3 for me. Number 4 would be my Pat McGrath palette. I love this baby. And then number 5, Natasha Denona. Number 6 would be my Too Faced palette. And number 7 would be my Tarte in Bloom, which you can't see. Let's try it. This angle sucks, but it's the only one I have. Going Coconuts, Sultry, Latte, PMG, Natasha Denona, Too Faced Peach palette, Tarte and Bloom. That is my top 7 as far as like more mainstream brands go. Oh, okay, all done.